On what was supposed to be just an ordinary morning run, Mike Tyson had no idea he was about to step into a real fight. The peaceful early morning park suddenly became a hiding place for a dark secret. A little girl, her eyes filled with fear, made a trembling hand gesture for help, a signal only the sharp-eyed would notice. The crisp morning air filled the urban park. The first rays of sunlight pierced through the canopy, casting dappled light onto the stone-paved path. The cheerful chirping of birds blended with the steady rhythm of sneakers hitting the ground, the relieved breaths of early joggers, and the distant laughter of a few families out for a stroll. This park was where Mike Tyson found tranquility, a rare peaceful corner in a life once full of turmoil. The retired boxing legend no longer stood in the ring, surrounded by roaring crowds or flashing cameras. Instead, he chose running, a simple habit to keep his body strong and his mind sharp. Mike moved at a steady pace, his muscular legs still carrying the power of a warrior who once astonished the world. He wore a tight black t-shirt, sweat glistening on his tanned skin, and his piercing eyes scanned his surroundings, a habit of someone always on guard. Though he'd left the ring behind, his fierce aura hadn't faded. It was merely cloaked beneath a calmer exterior. A thought echoed in his mind. No one can outrun me, but at least this keeps my head from going crazy. He smirked faintly, chuckling to himself. The park was lively as usual that day. A middle-aged man with a fluffy dog jogged past, nodding a greeting to Mike. In the distance, a few kids giggled beside their parents on the grass, while a group of elderly people exercised near the small lake. Everything seemed peaceful, normal, until Mike noticed the girl. She sat on a wooden bench near the path, about 10 meters away from him. A small, delicate girl, maybe 9 or 10 years old, dressed in a light green dress, her hair neatly braided into tiny plaits. But something was off. She wasn't smiling, wasn't playing, wasn't looking around like other kids. She sat motionless, hands resting on her lap, back unnaturally straight, as if frozen. Her wide eyes were empty, yet brimming with a fear Mike recognized instantly. The look of someone who'd faced immense pressure, who'd stood before danger. He slowed his pace, his breathing still steady, but his heart starting to race. Next to the girl was a man. He wore a long black coat and sunglasses, despite the soft morning light. A newspaper lay open in his hands, but the way he held it, loosely, not really reading, raised Mike's suspicions. The man's head was lowered, but his broad shoulders and seated posture exuded alertness, like a predator waiting to strike. The contrast between the man's feigned calm and the girl's palpable tension twisted Mike's gut. He'd faced all kinds of opponents in the ring, from brutes to cunning tacticians, and his instincts rarely failed him. Something was very wrong here. Mike kept running, but his eyes stayed locked on them. As he drew closer, the girl looked up, and for a fleeting moment, their gazes met. No words, no big movements, just a look, but it pierced through him. Her lips parted slightly, as if to speak. Then suddenly, she made a small gesture. Her right hand clenched into a fist, thumb tucked inside, the other fingers closed tightly around it. That signal stopped Mike's breath cold. He recognized it instantly. Years ago, during a charity interview, he'd heard a police officer mention this gesture, a silent cry for help taught to children by anti-kidnapping organizations. It wasn't random, not a child's game. It was a plea, a wordless scream from a kid in danger. Mike came to a full stop a few steps away, crouching to retie his shoelaces as a pretext to observe more closely. He muttered to himself, "What the hell is going on here?" The man Victor Grant, a name Mike would learn later, suddenly folded the newspaper, his movements slow but deliberate. He stood, his left hand gripping the girl's wrist, pulling her to her feet. Aisha, her name, though Mike didn't know it yet, didn't resist, but her steps were stiff, like a puppet on strings. Victor turned away, leading her toward the park's exit, his shoulders tensing slightly as if he'd sensed Mike's stare. Mike straightened up, his fists clenching. A brief struggle played out in his mind. Maybe it's a misunderstanding, he told himself. Maybe she's just shy, and he's family. But then he recalled Aisha's eyes, that desperate look, the unmistakable signal as clear as a punch to the face. He'd knocked out giants in the ring, faced his own fears, and he knew one thing for certain. If he ignored this, if he turned and kept running, he'd never forgive himself. Victor and Aisha disappeared behind a row of trees. Mike took a deep breath, the familiar rush of adrenaline surging in his chest. The feeling before every big fight when he knew a battle was coming. He whispered to himself, "All right, if you want to play, I'll play with you." Without hesitation, he quickened his pace after them, keeping just enough distance to stay unnoticed. His sharp eyes locked onto Victor's back, and in his mind he vowed, "I'm gonna find out what's going on, and if you dare touch that girl, you'll regret ever crossing me." Mike Tyson quickened his pace, but he was careful to maintain his distance, blending into the sparse crowd in the park to avoid drawing attention. Victor Grant led Aisha toward the eastern exit, where the trees thinned out, giving way to an asphalt road that led to a small bus stop tucked along the curb. Mike's sharp eyes never left them. He noticed Victor constantly turning his head, scanning the surroundings, but not too obviously. This guy wasn't an amateur. The way he moved, the way his hand gripped Aisha's wrist tightly, all of it exuded a cold, calculated control, like someone who'd done this so many times it had become second nature. Mike muttered to himself, "You think you're smart, but I've fought guys smarter than you," and they all ended up flat on the canvas. Aisha walked beside Victor, her small feet struggling to keep up with his long strides. She didn't look up, didn't glance around, just kept her head down, her braided hair swaying lightly with each step. But the way her shoulders stayed rigid, the way her free hand clutched the hem of her light green dress, these were signs of someone suppressing fear. Mike felt a surge of heat in his chest, like the fire that flared up before every big fight. He'd faced all kinds of opponents in the ring, from raging bulls charging head-on to cunning ones playing mind games. But seeing a child treated like this made him want to charge in right then and there, knock the man out without a word. Yet he held back. "Not yet," he told himself, taking a deep breath to calm the adrenaline surging through him. "I need to know what you're planning with her." Victor and Aisha left the park, crossing a narrow street where a few bicycles whizzed by and a street vendor pushed a cart of chicken porridge. Mike followed, keeping about 15 meters behind, bending down to pick up an empty water bottle someone had discarded as a cover for his intent. He observed every detail. Victor didn't speak to Aisha, didn't comfort or reassure her, no hint of a father or relative. He just pulled her along, like she was a piece of cargo, and the way Aisha followed without resistance made Mike grind his teeth. "You're not her family," he thought. "I'm as sure of that as I am of how hard my punches hit." Victor stopped at the bus stop, a small metal shelter with a rusted roof and a long bench covered in scratches. He pulled Aisha down to sit, then pulled a phone from his black coat pocket, swiping a few times before tucking it back in. Mike stood about 20 meters away, leaning against a large tree, pretending to check the sports watch on his wrist. He scanned the stop. Aside from Victor and Aisha, there was only an elderly woman sitting at the far end with a cloth bag on her lap, her trembling hands knitting, and a young guy with earbuds, mumbling along to his music, oblivious to his surroundings. Victor didn't loosen his grip on Aisha. His large hand clamped tightly around her wrist, as if afraid she'd bolt at any moment. Mike felt the pulse pounding in his temples. "If you're her family, then I'm the heavyweight champ for the 10th time," he muttered to himself, his inner voice dripping with both sarcasm and anger. An old bus rolled up, its engine rumbling as it came to a stop at the shelter, gray smoke puffing from the exhaust. The doors creaked open, and Victor stood, pulling Aisha onto the bus without hesitation. Mike didn't hesitate either, striding forward with a calm demeanor like an ordinary commuter. He tossed a few coins into the fare box near the driver, a tired, middle-aged man who didn't bother looking up, then took a seat in the middle of the bus, about 5 rows behind Victor and Aisha. The bus wasn't crowded, with only a handful of passengers scattered about. A man in a work uniform dozing near the door, his head slumped to his chest, a young woman glued to her phone, fingers swiping nonstop, and an old man clutching a cane in the front row, his cloudy eyes staring out the window. Victor led Aisha to the back of the bus, near the right side window. He sat beside her, one hand resting on the back of the seat, but his posture wasn't relaxed. It was that of someone on guard, ready to act at any moment. Mike tilted his head, watching from the corner of his eye. Aisha sat pressed against the window, hands on her lap, head bowed low. She didn't move, didn't look outside, just stared blankly ahead, as if she'd given up all hope. Victor was different. He maintained a calm facade, but his small movements didn't escape Mike's notice. His right hand tapping a rhythm on his knee, his head slightly tilted to check the passengers, his eyes behind the sunglasses surely scanning the bus for threats. Mike smirked, a dangerous yet confident smile flickering across his face. "You're getting nervous, aren't you?" "Good. So am I." The bus jolted forward, rattling along the bumpy road, the sound of tires grinding against gravel a steady hum. Mike kept his breathing even, but his mind was racing. He didn't know who Victor was or where he was taking Aisha, but one thing was certain. This guy wasn't good news. Aisha's plea for help wasn't a joke or a figment of his imagination. He'd heard stories from charities, seen PSA videos about child abductors, predators lurking in the shadows, hunting vulnerable prey. And the way Victor controlled Aisha, the way he moved quickly yet cautiously, matched the profile of someone on the run or executing a carefully calculated plan. Mike told himself, "I'm not letting you get away, not today." He sat still, observing for a few more minutes, letting things settle. The bus rolled through bustling neighborhoods, the sounds of honking horns and street vendors filtering through the open windows. A middle-aged woman boarded at the next stop, lugging a heavy bag of vegetables plopping down near Mike with a huff. He nodded lightly in greeting, keeping up a friendly appearance, but his eyes stayed locked on Victor and Aisha. The girl remained motionless like a small statue, though once he saw her hand tremble slightly, as if fighting back a sob. Victor didn't notice. He was looking out the window, his tapping growing faster, like he was counting down to something. Mike decided to make a move. He stood, pretending to search for a more comfortable seat, then slowly made his way toward the back. His steps were light, silent, like how he used to move in the ring to throw off an opponent. As he neared Victor and Aisha's row, he stopped, leaning down with a friendly smile, the same smile that once unnerved opponents before a knockout. "You really like the green of that dress, huh, kid?" he asked, his deep voice warm, directed at Aisha. She flinched slightly, looking up at him for a split second. Her eyes sparked with a flicker of hope, a tiny but unmistakable glimmer, like a light in the dark. But Victor cut in immediately. "She's shy," he said, his voice cold but controlled, as if rehearsed. "We're heading home. Don't bother us." Mike locked eyes with Victor, unblinking. He noticed the man's grip tighten on Aisha's wrist. A subtle move, but enough to make her tremble, her small shoulders hunching as if trying to shrink further. "You look tired, kid," Mike continued, still staring at Victor, his tone now laced with a hint of challenge. "Long trip?" Victor's lips twitched into a humorless smile, a mask slapped on too quickly. "Visiting family," he replied, his voice flat. "She needs rest." Mike nodded slowly, but in his mind, everything clicked like a straight punch to the face. This guy was lying. Aisha wasn't tired. She was terrified. He returned to his seat, walking deliberately, but his eyes stayed on them through the window's reflection. Victor wasn't at ease anymore. His knee tapping sped up, and once he turned to look directly at Mike, his gaze behind the sunglasses trying to bore through him. "You know I'm watching," Mike thought, his fists clenching under the seat. "Good. I want you to know." The bus passed a few more stops, the scenery shifting. High rises gave way to older, run-down neighborhoods with small, shabby shops and narrow, winding streets. Passengers thinned out. The worker got off near a construction site. The young woman stepped out at a street corner with her earbuds still in, leaving Mike, Victor, Aisha, and a few others on board. The air in the bus grew heavy, despite the open windows. Mike felt his chest tighten, not from fatigue, but from the sense that something was about to happen, the same feeling he'd had before every big fight, when an opponent was about to throw a decisive blow. Finally, the bus stopped in a quieter part of the city, where wide streets saw little foot traffic, and sunlight was blocked by squat, low buildings. Victor stood, pulling Aisha off the bus without a word, his movements swift and practiced. Mike waited a few seconds, letting them get ahead, then followed, keeping just enough distance to stay unnoticed. Victor led her across the street, past a shuttered convenience store and an overgrown vacant lot, then turned sharply into a dark alley where streetlights couldn't reach. Mike felt adrenaline flood his system, the familiar rush before a big fight when he knew a battle was imminent. He muttered, "You want to play hide and seek? Fine. I'm a master at finding opponents." The alley was narrow and damp, its peeling walls stained, the faint stench of old garbage wafting from forgotten bins in the corner. Victor's footsteps echoed steadily, mixed with the soft scuff of Aisha's small shoes, struggling to keep up, occasionally stumbling on the uneven ground. Mike trailed behind, his steps light but swift, like a panther stalking prey in the dark. He kept his distance, ducking behind corners or abandoned crates along the way. Victor didn't look back, but his quickened pace suggested he was nervous, or had sensed Mike's presence. "You feel me, don't you?" Mike thought, his fists tightening, muscles flexing under his black t-shirt. The alley twisted deeper into an almost abandoned area. The low buildings on either side were now just empty concrete shells, windows shattered, and faded billboards dangling in the breeze. The sounds of traffic from the main road faded, replaced by an oppressive silence broken only by footsteps and the whistle of wind through gaps. Mike felt the air shift, a heavy, suffocating tension, like the calm before a storm. He'd fought in the ring with thousands cheering, faced opponents twice his size, but this time, the pressure was different. This wasn't about titles or money. It was about a child, a girl who needed him, even if she didn't know who he was. Victor stopped abruptly, about 10 meters ahead. He turned, facing Mike directly. The faint, flickering light from a distant street lamp illuminated his face, revealing cold eyes behind sunglasses and a defiant smirk. Aisha stood beside him, trembling, clutching the hem of her green dress, her eyes fixed on the ground as if trying to escape it all. "Why are you following me?" Victor growled, his hand still gripping her wrist, his knuckles white from the pressure. Mike took a step forward, his voice low but sharp, each word landing like a punch. "Just making sure the kid's okay. She doesn't look like she's having fun." Victor's lips twitched, trying to maintain his calm, but the way his shoulders tensed betrayed his unease. "We're going home," he said, his tone flat but edged with irritation. "You get off on stalking people?" Mike tilted his head, his gaze cutting through the man's facade. "If she's not happy, I doubt that home exists," he replied, his voice icy. He crouched slightly, looking straight at Aisha, his tone softening but firm, like how he'd once spoken to trainees in the gym. "Who's this guy to you, kid?" Aisha flinched, her lips trembling. For a moment she looked up at Mike, her eyes brimming with tears, glistening under the dim light. Then she whispered, her voice so faint it nearly vanished in the wind. "Not my uncle." Her words were weak, but to Mike they rang like an alarm bell. Victor yanked her arm behind him, trying to pull her along. "Let's go," he snarled, quickening his pace. But Mike blocked the way. With the solid stance of a boxer, he stood like a steel wall, hands hanging loose but ready to strike. "Not so fast," he said, his voice cold, his eyes locked on Victor. From the shadows at the end of the alley, 3 figures emerged, slow but menacing. One was tall and muscular, wearing a tank top that showed off a snake tattoo coiling around his arm. Big Tony. Another was lean but agile, with razor-sharp eyes, hands in his pockets, Marcus. The third wore a baseball cap, a lit cigarette in hand, smoke curling into the air. Leon. Leon spoke first, his raspy voice laced with mockery. "You picked the wrong place to play hero, pal." He exhaled a plume of smoke, stepping closer, the other 2 following, forming a loose semicircle around Mike. Mike smirked, his smile both dangerous and defiant, like the look he'd given opponents before a knockout punch. "We won't know who's wrong until we fight," he said, his voice low but resonant in the quiet alley. "But I bet you'll regret showing up." Victor tightened his grip on Aisha, his eyes flickering between Mike and the 3 men, as if calculating his next move. Mike felt the air shift. The tension before a fight erupted when everything boiled down to survival. He stood tall, muscles taut under his black t-shirt, his piercing eyes scanning each man. "All right," he thought, adrenaline pumping through his veins. "If you want to play, I'll give you a fight to remember." The air in the alley thickened with tension, the flickering street lamp casting jagged shadows across the damp pavement. Mike Tyson stood rooted in place, his broad frame a wall of muscle and resolve, facing Victor Grant and the 3 men who had emerged from the darkness, Big Tony, Marcus, and Leon. Aisha trembled beside Victor, her small hand clutching the hem of her green dress, her eyes darting between Mike and the ground. Victor's grip on her wrist tightened, his knuckles whitening, but his face remained a mask of forced calm. The three newcomers spread out, their movements deliberate, like wolves circling prey. Mike's lips curled into a faint, dangerous smile. "All right," he muttered under his breath, his voice a low growl. "Let's dance." Leon flicked his cigarette to the ground, grinding it under his boot, and took a step forward. "Last chance, tough guy," he said, his voice raspy and edged with menace. "Walk away, and we'll pretend this never happened." Big Tony cracked his knuckles, the sound echoing off the alley walls while Marcus shifted his weight, his sharp eyes glinting like a predator's. Mike didn't flinch. He squared his shoulders, his fists hanging loose at his sides but ready to strike, the way they always had before a fight. "I don't walk away from kids in trouble," he said, his tone flat but carrying the weight of a promise. "You want me gone? Make me." The alley erupted into chaos. Big Tony moved first, charging at Mike like a bull, his massive frame barreling forward with a guttural roar. Mike's instincts kicked in, years of training on the boxing ring snapping into focus. He sidestepped at the last second, Tony's fist whistling past his ear, and countered with a lightning-fast uppercut. The blow landed square on Tony's jaw, a sickening crack splitting the air as the big man staggered back, clutching his face. "Too slow," Mike growled, already pivoting to face the next threat. Marcus darted in, quicker than Tony, a switchblade flashing in his hand. The steel gleamed under the dim light as he slashed at Mike's chest. Mike ducked low, the blade slicing through the air above him, and grabbed Marcus's wrist with both hands. With a twist honed from decades of fighting, he yanked the arm down and drove his knee into Marcus's gut. The man gasped, doubling over, and Mike finished him with a brutal elbow to the back of the neck. Marcus crumpled to the ground, the knife clattering across the pavement. 2 down, Mike thought, his pulse pounding in his ears. Victor saw his chance in the chaos. He yanked Aisha's arm, dragging her toward the far end of the alley, his calm facade cracking into desperation. "Move!" he barked, his voice sharp with panic. Aisha stumbled, her small feet tripping over the uneven ground, but she didn't cry out. Just a soft whimper escaped her lips. Mike's head snapped toward them, his blood boiling. "Not happening," he snarled. He lunged forward, closing the distance in 3 strides, but before he could reach Victor, Leon stepped into his path, a pistol glinting in his hand. "Back off!" Leon shouted, raising the gun. The barrel trembled slightly, betraying his nerves, but his finger hovered over the trigger. Mike froze for a split second, his eyes locking onto the weapon. He'd faced danger before, punches, knives, even death threats, but a gun in a dark alley was a different beast. "Drop it," Mike said, his voice low and steady, each word a command. Leon smirked, though it didn't reach his eyes. "You're not the one giving orders here." The gunshot rang out, a deafening bang that echoed through the narrow space. Mike moved on instinct, diving to the side as the bullet slammed into the brick wall behind him, sending chips of masonry flying. He hit the ground rolling, then sprang up, closing the gap before Leon could fire again. His hands shot out, clamping around Leon's wrist like a vice, and twisted hard. The gun dropped with a metallic clank, and Mike drove his fist into Leon's jaw, a clean, devastating right hook. Leon's head snapped back, his body collapsing like a rag doll, out cold before he hit the pavement. Mike kicked the gun away, sending it skidding into the shadows, and turned just in time to see Victor shoving Aisha against the alley wall. "Stay there!" Victor hissed at her, his hands fumbling in his coat for something. A phone, a weapon, Mike couldn't tell. Aisha pressed herself against the bricks, her small frame shaking, tears streaking her face. Mike charged, his boots pounding the ground, and grabbed Victor's arm before he could pull anything out. "Let her go!" Outer Mike roared, wrenching Victor away from Aisha with a force that sent the man stumbling. Victor spun around, his sunglasses knocked askew, revealing wild, furious eyes. He swung a fist at Mike, a clumsy but desperate blow. Mike blocked it effortlessly with his forearm, then countered with a left jab to Victor's ribs. The man grunted, doubling over, but he wasn't done. He lunged again, this time aiming low, trying to tackle Mike to the ground. Mike planted his feet, absorbing the impact, and wrapped his arms around Victor's torso. With a guttural yell, he lifted the man clear off the ground, muscles straining under his shirt, and slammed him down onto the pavement. The air rushed out of Victor's lungs with a wheeze, and he lay there dazed, clutching his chest. Mike straightened up, breathing hard, his fists still clenched. He glanced around. Big Tony was groaning on the ground, clutching his jaw. Marcus was out cold. Leon lay sprawled near the wall, the gun far out of reach. Victor was down, but not unconscious, his eyes darting as he struggled to catch his breath. The alley was silent now, save for the faint hum of the city beyond and Aisha's soft sobs. Mike turned to her, softening his voice. "You okay, kid?" he asked, stepping closer, but keeping his hands visible, not wanting to scare her more. Aisha nodded shakily, her small hands pressed against the wall behind her. She didn't speak, just stared at him with wide, tear-filled eyes, like she couldn't believe he was real. Mike crouched down to her level, his massive frame shrinking to meet her gaze. "You're safe now," he said, his tone gentle but firm. "No one's taking you anywhere." Before Aisha could respond, the sound of sirens pierced the air, sharp, insistent, growing louder by the second. Red and blue lights flashed at the alley's entrance, painting the walls with an eerie glow. Mike stood up, raising his hands slowly as footsteps pounded toward them. "Police!" a voice shouted, followed by the clatter of boots and the metallic click of weapons being drawn. Half a dozen officers spilled into the alley, their flashlights cutting through the darkness, guns trained on the scene. "Hands up, now!" one of them barked, a burly officer with a buzz cut. Mike complied, keeping his palms open, his eyes steady. "I'm not the problem here," he said, nodding toward Victor and the others. "They are." The officers moved quickly, swarming the alley. Two of them hauled Victor to his feet, cuffing his wrists as he spat curses under his breath. Another pair checked on Big Tony, Marcus, and Leon, securing them with practiced efficiency. A female officer, tall, with a stern face softened by concern, approached Aisha, kneeling beside her. "Hey, sweetheart," she said, her voice calm. "Are you hurt?" Aisha shook her head, still trembling, but she edged closer to Mike, her small hand brushing his sleeve as if anchoring herself to him. A woman in plain clothes stepped forward, her badge glinting under the flickering street lamp. She had sharp features and a no-nonsense air. Detective Sarah Brooks, though Mike didn't know her name yet. She eyed him up and down, then glanced at the chaos around them. "You're Mike Tyson," she said, not a question but a statement. "Mind telling me what the hell happened here?" Mike lowered his hands as the officers waved him off, satisfied he wasn't a threat. He kept his voice even, though the adrenaline still coursed through him. "Saw the girl in the park," he said, nodding toward Aisha. "She made a signal. Thumb in, fingers closed. I've seen it before, means she needed help. Followed this guy." He jerked his head at Victor. "And his buddies showed up. Things got messy." Sarah's eyes narrowed, flicking to Victor, who was now slumped against the wall, handcuffs glinting on his wrists. "Victor Grant," she muttered, almost to herself. She turned back to Mike, her expression darkening. "We've been tracking this guy for months. Suspected trafficking, but no hard evidence until now. You just stumbled into something bigger than a street fight." Mike's fists clenched at his sides, his jaw tightening. "Trafficking?" The word hit him like a punch to the gut. He looked at Aisha, now wrapped in a blanket one of the officers had given her, her small frame dwarfed by the fabric. "So this wasn't random?" "No," Sarah said, pulling out a radio. "These guys don't work alone. The way they reacted, the gun, they were expecting backup that didn't come. You probably saved her from disappearing into a network we've been trying to crack." She pressed the radio to her ear, barking orders. "Brooks here. Need backup at 14th and Carver. We've got 4 in custody, 1 minor recovered. Send a unit to process this mess." Mike exhaled slowly, the weight of her words sinking in. He'd thought he was just helping one kid, but this was a web, dark, sprawling, and far uglier than he'd imagined. He crouched beside Aisha again, his voice softening. "You're going home, kid," he said. "They'll take care of you now." Aisha sniffled, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible but steady. Mike gave her a small smile, tapping her knuckles gently with his fist. "Anytime." Sarah cleared her throat, drawing his attention. "We'll need a statement from you," she said, then smirked faintly. "But maybe go home after that. You've done enough hero work for one day." She turned to the officers. "Get the girl checked out. Start processing these clowns. This just turned into a damn circus." Mike stepped back, watching as the officers escorted Victor and his crew to the squad cars, their curses fading into the night. A female officer guided Aisha toward an ambulance parked at the alley's mouth, her small figure silhouetted against the flashing lights. She glanced back once, her eyes meeting Mike's, and for the first time, there was a flicker of something other than fear. Gratitude, maybe even trust. Mike nodded to her, then turned away, the adrenaline finally ebbing as the reality of what he'd done settled in. The alley slowly emptied as the police took control, their radios crackling with static and clipped commands. Red and blue lights pulsed against the brick walls, casting long shadows that danced across the pavement. Victor Grant and his three accomplices, Big Tony, Marcus, and Leon, were shoved into the backs of squad cars, their wrists bound in cuffs, their faces a mix of defiance and defeat. Officers moved with purpose, securing the scene, collecting the gun and knife as evidence, while a paramedic checked Aisha in the ambulance parked just outside the alley's mouth. Mike Tyson stood off to the side, his broad frame still tense, his breathing steadying as the adrenaline drained from his system. His knuckles ached faintly from the fight, a familiar sting that brought back memories of the ring. But this wasn't about glory or titles. This was something heavier. Detective Sarah Brooks approached him again, her sharp eyes scanning the chaos before settling on him. She tucked her radio back into her belt, her expression a blend of exhaustion and respect. "You've got a hell of a right hook, Tyson," she said, nodding toward the spot where Leon had gone down. "Good thing you were here. Most people would have kept running, literally." Mike shrugged, wiping a bead of sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. "Didn't feel like a choice," he said, his voice low but firm. "Saw the kid's signal. Couldn't ignore it." Sarah nodded, her lips pressing into a thin line. "That signal saved her life. And you following through? That might have just saved a lot more." She pulled a small notebook from her pocket, flipping it open. "Victor Grant's been on our radar for a while, suspected of moving kids through a trafficking ring. We had eyes on him, but no solid proof. Tonight you gave us what we needed. Him, his crew, and a witness." "One," she glanced at Aisha, now sitting on the ambulance's edge, a blanket draped over her shoulders. "She's lucky you noticed." Mike's gaze followed hers, landing on Aisha. The paramedic was talking to her softly, checking her wrists where Victor's grip had left faint red marks. She looked small, fragile, but there was a spark in her eyes now, a flicker of resilience that hadn't been there in the park. "Lucky," Mike muttered almost to himself. Luck didn't have much to do with it. She was scared out of her mind and still made that sign. "That's not luck. That's guts." Sarah raised an eyebrow, a faint smirk tugging at her mouth. "Fair point. Either way, we'll take it from here. She'll get checked out, reunited with her family if we can find them. If not, we've got resources." She scribbled something in her notebook, then looked up. "You should head home, champ. We'll need you for a statement later, but you've earned a break." Mike nodded, but his feet didn't move. He watched as the female officer from earlier helped Aisha down from the ambulance, guiding her toward a waiting police car. The girl hesitated, then turned back, her eyes finding Mike's across the alley. She didn't smile, didn't wave, just looked at him, her small hand clutching the blanket tighter. Mike raised a hand, a simple gesture, and she nodded back before climbing into the car. The door shut with a soft thunk, and the vehicle pulled away, its taillights fading into the night. He finally turned to leave, his boots scuffing the pavement as he walked out of the alley. The city hummed around him, distant horns, the murmur of late-night traffic, the occasional shout from a street vendor. But it all felt muted, like background noise to the thoughts churning in his head. He'd saved her. That much he knew. But Sarah's words stuck with him, a trafficking ring. This wasn't just one bad guy snatching a kid from a park. This was organized, planned, a machine with gears he couldn't see. How many other kids were out there right now, waiting for someone to notice? How many didn't know the signal or didn't have the chance to use it? By the time he got home, the sky was darkening, the last streaks of daylight swallowed by the horizon. His apartment was quiet, a modest place with a heavy bag in the corner and a few framed photos from his fighting days on the walls. He dropped onto the couch, not bothering to turn on the lights, and stared at the ceiling. The fight replayed in his mind. The rush of it, the sound of fists on flesh, the weight of Victor hitting the ground. But it was Aisha's face that lingered most. Those wide, terrified eyes in the park, and the way they'd softened just a little when she'd said, "Thank you," in the alley. He rubbed his knuckles, the ache grounding him. "One kid," he muttered. "One out of how many?" Sleep didn't come easy that night. When it did, it was fitful, filled with flashes of the alley, the gun, and Aisha's trembling hands. He woke early, the city still cloaked in pre-dawn gray, and decided to go back to the park. He didn't know why, maybe to clear his head, maybe to feel some kind of closure. He laced up his running shoes, pulled on a hoodie, and hit the familiar path, his breath fogging in the cool morning air. The park was different now, though nothing had changed on the surface. Families still strolled along the paths, dogs barked at squirrels, and joggers pounded the pavement with steady rhythms. But Mike saw it all through a new lens. Every bench, every shadowed corner held potential danger now. A place where someone could hide, waiting. He slowed his pace near the spot where he'd first seen Aisha, the wooden bench empty now, its paint chipped and weathered. He stopped, hands on his hips and staring at it. Could have missed her, he thought. Could have kept running. 2 weeks passed, life slipping back into its routines. Mike returned to his runs, his workouts, the quiet rhythm of a retired fighter. But the alley stayed with him, a weight he couldn't shake. He'd called Sarah a few days after, giving his statement at the station, a stark, fluorescent-lit room that smelled of coffee and old paper. She'd updated him. Victor and his crew were locked up, facing charges that could keep them behind bars for decades. The investigation had widened, uncovering links to a broader network. Aisha was safe, reunited with her mother, who'd reported her missing after she'd vanished from a playground. "You did good, Tyson," Sarah had said, clapping him on the shoulder. "Real good. It should have been enough." But it wasn't. Not when he knew there were others out there, kids who didn't have someone like him passing by at the right moment. He started digging, quietly on his own. He reached out to old contacts, people he'd met through charity events, asking about trafficking, about signs to watch for. He wasn't a cop, wasn't a vigilante, but he couldn't just sit still. Not anymore. Then one morning he saw her again. He was jogging through the park, the sun climbing higher, casting golden light across the grass, when he spotted a familiar figure on the same bench. Aisha sat there, no longer stiff with fear, her green dress replaced by a purple tracksuit. She was alone for a moment, kicking her legs lightly until a woman, her mother Mike guessed, walked over from a nearby picnic table carrying a water bottle. Aisha looked up as Mike approached, her face breaking into a small, hesitant smile. He slowed to a stop, pulling his earbuds out, and grinned back. "Hey, kid," he said, crouching slightly. "How you holding up?" She shrugged, but the lightness in her posture said more than words could. "Better," she said, her voice stronger now, though still soft. "Mom says I can take boxing lessons. Like you." Mike chuckled, a deep rumbling sound that echoed off the trees. "Boxing, huh? Good choice. You've already got the heart for it." He tapped his chest with a fist. "Took guts to make that sign back there." Aisha's smile widened, and she glanced down at her hands, flexing her fingers. "I was scared," she admitted. "But you came." "Always will if you need me," Mike said, his tone serious but warm. He straightened up as her mother approached, a woman in her 30s with tired eyes but a grateful smile. She extended a hand and Mike shook it, her grip firm despite her slight frame. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been there." Mike nodded, uncomfortable with the praise but accepting it. "Just glad she's okay," he said. "Keep her close." "I will," the woman replied, pulling Aisha into a quick hug. The girl giggled, then stepped forward and threw her arms around Mike in a sudden, fierce embrace. He froze for a second, then patted her back gently, his massive hand dwarfing her small shoulders. "Take care, champ," he said as she pulled away, her grin bright now. "Bye, Mr. Mike," she called, waving as she ran back to her mother. He watched them go, a warmth spreading in his chest, easing the weight he'd carried since that night. He turned back to the path, slipping his earbuds in, but not playing any music. The park hummed around him, alive with ordinary moments. But he saw it differently now, every glance a chance to spot trouble, every quiet corner a place to protect. Aisha was safe, but the world wasn't. Not yet. He started jogging again, his pace steady, his mind sharp. Next time, he thought, his eyes scanning the horizon, I won't wait for a sign. I'll find them first. The city stretched out before him, full of shadows and secrets, but also hope. Hope that one man with the right heart and the right fists could make a difference. Mike Tyson ran on, not just for himself anymore, but for the ones who couldn't run away.